The honourable member for Bowman.
Some things must be fought for. Not everyone shares our values. Talk won't always get you there alone. Not everyone is always ready to talk, but no group should ever be beyond talking to. Without making any references to Christian morality, even humanists will describe the just war. And as Rothbard said, when people try to ward off the threat of coercive domination by others. And Afghanistan fits that perfectly, and it always has. Now, sure, this debate comes at a time when it's not running that well. The PR battle and the bad stories at home are probably in some ways overwhelming the stories that we hear about victories on the ground. And many of us are truly seduced by the notion of war by remote control and without casualties. The idea that perhaps we can pull away from battlefronts like this and our values and our lives will be unaffected. And for many, I guess, the connections and joining the dots between 9/11 and the Horn of Africa and Bali and Philippines, Times Square, it was all that little bit too difficult. And militant Islam is perhaps something that we can afford to ignore. Greater still, I suspect, that because it was John Howard who joined those dots together so articulately, it's become a potent political battle over the last decade. So to Australians who have questions, and it's only right that we lift that veil and answer them for the people, many Australians out there must feel, as Kipling described, for undemocratic reasons. And for motives not of state, they arrive at their conclusions largely inarticulate, void of self-expression. They confide their views to none, but sometimes in a smoking room one learns why things were done. Well, let's learn why things are done. Let's learn why we're in Afghanistan. And it's far more complex than downloading a page from the Socialist Alliance website and running through the 8 reasons why we need to get out of Afghanistan now. The key questions I would put to the Australian people would be these, because they're right to be asked. Are our military leaders engaged in Afghanistan and balancing military potency and effectiveness with doing everything they can to spare the lives of our military and civilians? And I have no doubt that they are. Second, when can patrolling in the most dangerous parts of working in Afghanistan be taken over, in our case, by Ruzgan's 4th Brigade of the 205th Heroes Corps of the Afghan National Army? When can they start pulling the load and doing their fair share? And then finally, how vigorously can we proceed from defence to diplomacy and then to development? But my great frustration in this debate over the last 3 days are many. The first is that this work in Afghanistan is immensely complex, and nothing infuriated me more than the member for Denison, whose glib conclusion ran like this: the only way to turn Afghanistan around now is to hastily rebuild the governance, the infrastructure, services and jobs which give people hope and underpin a long-term peace. There is no one on this planet who knows how to do that. There is no way to hastily rebuild governance. If there was a way to do it, we'd have been doing it decades ago. This is one of the most complex engagements of our time. Let's also remember that our Australian forces, like the Coalition, work under extraordinary military scrutiny. And sure, in every war there has been those who felt we should come home, but never has it been done under such ruthless media scrutiny of everything these fine soldiers do. That's a very, very tough ask, as we have learnt. This debate has still been a little too simplistic. We have not yet considered the role of Iran in maintaining the effort of the Taliban. There has been inadequate attention paid to whether our withdrawal will strengthen or weaken Pakistan, and what we're going to do with those federally associated tribal areas, FATA, in northern Pakistan, which in the end are responsible for creatures such as Najibullah Zazi and Faisal Shahzad, the Manhattan subway bomber and the Times Square bomber, respectively. In the end, there must be a solution to that. We still haven't truly examined in this debate the nature of the adversary, the Taliban, this heterogeneous group of fighters around Afghanistan who for generations have been fighting the British, the Sikhs, the Persians, the Macedonians, the Mughals, the Mongols, the Soviets, the list goes on. That is not a reason to stop trying. That is a reason to find a way to succeed. There is an end state in Afghanistan, and we must not lose hope of that. The end state is, in all asymmetric wars, is to build a domestic force of police and on-the-ground military presence that is strong enough for democracy to take root. And sure, I'm not saying that these elections in Afghanistan have been perfect, and I'm not saying that Karzai is an immaculate president free of any whiff of corruption. But consider the political conditions in which this administration operates. This is a $12 billion illicit GDP, annual GDP, operating in parallel with a $14 billion military operation. It's almost impossible not to be involved in a cash grab with your hand out. It's almost impossible for schools not to cost 10 times what they should. And it's almost impossible for ordinary everyday Afghans not to be unhappy about that. But we're a little tired of the analyst reports being written by people across the border, and we haven't heard in this debate enough about what the Afghans are saying, and I hope to address that today. In Afghanistan in 1992, I lived not with a military cordon, not under the hospitality of the Australian Army, not with a UN security clearance, but in a small village in northern Afghanistan. Went to the markets, went to the hen fights, drunk the olabolu, talked to people by the river. This is not a clear solution, and it is not an easy answer. But I think those words need to be heard. Kay Danes is a humanitarian worker who's been there right now. She's travelled from Nangarhar in the east to Herat in the west. I'm not going to select her quotes. I think I should be as non-selective as I can. But the one theme that comes through is peace and security. Second, finishing and get rid of corruption. And the third, the killing of innocent people by both international forces and the Taliban. It's not a clear picture, but the one thing that I hear over and over again from Afghans on the ground is the schools that were empty and the schools that were bombed are now the schools that are rebuilt and are full. And to me, that is such a powerful endorsement for what we are doing there. The women in Afghanistan will say, we're at university, I beg you, stay the course until we can finish our studies. Our fathers and our brothers are supporting us in our study, even though at night we get anonymous notes saying that we will come and kill you as soon as the coalition forces withdraw. There are simple questions to be asked. Is this deployment relevant to Australia? I argue that the damage inflicted by this aggressor, by the Taliban, and by its weakening links to al-Qaeda by virtue of the fact that we are there and they cannot remain in contact as easily with those Arabic petrodollars that fund al-Qaeda. They are not as well connected as they were, but they certainly still risk to us, I think, certain grave and lasting implications if we withdraw. Have every means, apart from war, been exhausted? The answer is, with these groups, yes. Is there a serious prospect of success in Afghanistan? Absolutely, simply by virtue of having got an election off the ground and then another election off the ground. And to walk away is to lose everything, not just back to 2005, but back potentially to 1992 when we were rebuilding towns, clearing the landmines. And there is no greater look on the face than of a family who return to their homes having had those landmines cleared. Now, if you talk to Afghans, they will say that the international forces have failed to bring peace. It's a truism. That security conditions in some parts are getting worse day by day. That the killing of innocent people is utterly regrettable, and in many cases there is an intense abhorrence for the fact that that's been done with only a small sort of flippant excuse from international forces. I'm not going to gild that, but I am going to say that the clear message that comes with that from Afghans is that if you evacuate, you leave us in despair. That the limited developments and the relative peace achieved in significant parts of the country would be entirely lost, and that everything you have done will collapse. It will go back to anarchy, back to the Taliban era, civil strife, warlords re-emerging, and total destruction of what we know. That's a clear message from Afghans. Sure, they don't love everything we do, but if you do a poll in Afghanistan and say, do you hate the war? Of course most people will say yes. It's a truism. We must endeavour, as the previous speaker, the member for Lynn, said, to negotiate with the Taliban. There's no secret about that. Secretary of State Clinton hasn't ruled that out. We know it's happening, but that's not the debate. The debate is about pulling our troops out. The debate is being driven by a Socialist Alliance agenda and two MPs that are in here, thanks to the vagaries of the preferential voting system, who are here saying, pull them out, and this is the list of the reasons. They're the Socialist Alliance reasons, and you can run through them. Life's getting worse for Afghans. Wrong. Where were you during the Taliban? More people are dying and being displaced as a result of military operations. Well, before there was a military operation, they were displaced for other reasons, in equivalent numbers. The war has cost us billions. Well, the war cost us $120 billion a year for the coalition in Iraq. In Afghanistan, we're spending just a fragment of that at around $20 billion a year for potentially far greater yields. This is not an economic war here. This is a war to make sure there is nowhere left to hide. Now, the next argument, the war has not liberated women. Well, you can't just quote one former MP from the Afghan Assembly who thinks that's the case. Talk to women in Afghanistan before you make such a foolish comment that women are not slowly being emancipated thanks to our presence. The Afghanistan government is corrupt and undemocratic is the next claim. Well, consider the conditions. It's a democratic government, it's got its warts, but what is the alternative? In fact, if you replaced the current administration, you'd end up with something very similar to what we have now, simply with a different head. The majority of the world wants the troops to leave and the Afghans don't want the war. I mean, this sort of ordinary polling that we're meant to be making national decisions from is frankly really disappointing. Even attributing the spread of terrorism worldwide to our presence in Afghanistan is absolutely amazing. And the fact that from the member for Denison, that some sort of terrorist here in Australia who wanted to attack the Holsworthy barracks attributed to our presence in Afghanistan. Are you suggesting, the member for Denison, is he suggesting we withdraw our troops so that this guy has a better day? I mean, seriously, we are here to fight for the values that we would regard as democratic values. Why are we there? Because we can be and we have the resources to do it. And there's a simple conviction that, given a fair go, human beings can better themselves. They just need to be given a chance to do it, and they can make a better world around them. These are values that we live by, and awkward ally as they are sometimes, the Americans also live by, and it's why I am proud that we continue to do it. It is one thing to shed tears for our wonderful troops that make the supreme sacrifice, and never forget the aid and care workers who work in similarly dangerous conditions, often suffer even greater privations, though not necessarily risking their lives in such intensity. They never know their enemy, but often still lose their lives. To all of those Australians, I say to you that these are the values we live by. Yes, we're engaged in a titanic struggle to free ourselves of a group of individuals who wish to impose their values on us, and by so doing, removing our liberties. That, to me, is one of the strongest reasons to have this fight. In closing, remember that the Taliban is not some crazy uniform entity. They are a conglomeration of warlords, of disenchanted mullahs, of young people, as I said in my maiden speech in 2004. This was even before we were actually in Afghanistan. And I said we have an urgent appointment. We only had one officer in Afghanistan in 2004 before we deployed. And I said at that time we have an urgent appointment with the Islamic world. On the one hand, we need to be making sure that trouble cannot be fomented in any corner of this planet by extremists, but on the other hand, we need to provide the economic opportunities so that the young and often dispossessed can have an opportunity to move into gaining capabilities rather than turning towards extremism. And those words are no less true than they were when they were said in 2004. They apply to exactly what we're doing in Afghanistan. This won't be easy, but please, I beg the Australian people, don't assume that this is something that can easily be done without a military presence. Part of it, if you call it shoot and talk, is the fact that the Taliban will have to one day come to the table. We may not defeat them, but we can handle them if we engage their respective groups effectively. The Haqqani network is one. It's been pointed out by Tom Gregg, a young Australian who's been an analyst on the ground in Afghanistan. The Haqqani network has an elderly leader who is probably in his final years. His 36-year-old son, Suraj, is different. He's not a tribal elder. He's not a religious scholar. He has known nothing but war. He has never been part of a government, nor lived in a peaceful society. Our one opportunity with the Taliban may be only a brief moment of sunshine. That's why I know that the US, that Holbrooke and that the others are going to have to reach out, but it's a two-step process. The debate today is a purely and simply a simple debate about withdrawing our troops, and it is one that would undermine everything that we've achieved so far.